run. There may be a snake. There could be an alligator.
I'm in Point Comfort on the Gulf Coast in Texas, and there's something dangerous lurking in this water.
Lexi.
Oh, wow. That's all plastic pellets in there. Plastic pellet, plastic pellet, plastic pellet. Microplastics have shown up in the blood, brains, and testicles of nearly every human tested.
Microplastics.
Microplastics are everywhere.
They've been found in almost every organ in the body.
We're eating and drinking more plastic than we might have realized.
And you might be likely to blame your own personal behavior for this junk ending up in your body.
Swap out that plastic cutting board.
Plastic is being leached into my coffee.
But it's not all from your cutting board or water bottle.
Plants like this one are producing a form of microplastics that are relatively unknown and nearly completely unregulated.
The problem is once they get outside the fence line, they get into the waterway, things can eat them because they look like fish eggs. They absorb the harmful chemicals like PCBs and PAHs, and those are the things that make them hazardous once they're in the environment. Lots of plastic.
So I went to the Texas Gulf Coast, dotted with chemical and plastic manufacturing plants, to figure out how microplastics are ending up in our waterways and ultimately in our bodies.
So all those little white dots, those are all pellets.
Pellets.
That's all plastic pellets in there.
And why the corporations largely responsible face no repercussions. Plastic was invented in the early 20th century, but didn't become mass-produced until World War II, when America needed to manufacture armaments quickly.
Armament manufacturers immediately turned to plastics for assistance.
But when the war ended, there was all this plastic infrastructure with no war stuff to make, so they had to pivot to consumer goods. And part of that was convincing people during the 1950s that this stuff was normal and natural.
Plastics come from many different raw materials. Some of the materials are natural elements like water and air, with many contributions of the kingdom of plastics designed for practical, gracious living.
Well, some predictions from the 60s were a bit overwrought, like the guy who said plumbers would use so much plastic that they'd be called plasticators. A lot of these early predictions of the future were accurate. You know this, you live in the future. Plastic is everywhere. There's one invention that really shows how the industry operates.
The EasyGoer lightweight plastic bottle for Coca-Cola.
The EasyGoer, the first plastic soda bottle, was introduced by Coca-Cola and Monsanto, the chemical company, in the early 70s. After a quick FDA approval, the EasyGoer was launched in small test markets, and according to this film produced by Coca-Cola, people loved it.
My brother bought some Coke in a plastic bottle and I tasted it and it tastes the same as in a glass bottle.
Tried the plastic bottle and I like the way it tastes.
Love them.
The bottles are made using a chemical called acrylonitrile, which studies at the time showed did not leak significant particles into the beverage inside, which is important because acrylonitrile is a carcinogen when consumed.
Only from your Coca-Cola bottler.
Just 2 years after the test run launched, the FDA rescinded approval. The amount of migration of particles from bottle to contents wasn't safe. The bottle was banned.
I like it very much. I have a youngster 5 and I feel safe that he has the Coke in the plastic bottle.
The FDA approved the safety of acrylonitrile bottles using testing data from Monsanto, who made the bottles. The FDA did no testing of their own during the approval process. Obviously, bottles don't use acrylonitrile plastic anymore, but the Coke Monsanto story shows how the chemical industry manipulates facts and regulators to push things that we don't fully understand yet out into the world as quickly as possible. From 1950 to today, plastic production went from 2 million tons a year to 450 million tons. Along the way, we see something familiar pop up. In a 1965 congressional hearing, a mention of the waterway between Connecticut and Massachusetts, about where the Monsanto plastic plant was. Strange plastic pellets emerging in the water. To find out how this plastic's getting into our water and everything else, I went to the Gulf Coast of Texas, which has the highest concentration of plastic production plants in America.
So always looking for the round ones, right? Or like the little guys, yeah.
Right, so I got 3 already.
This is Jace Tunnell, a leading expert on the ecology of the Gulf of Mexico at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Jace spends a lot of time looking for those little plastic pellets I mentioned earlier. He runs the Nurdle Patrol, a project for citizen scientists around the world to go out and search for nurdles and report their findings, so Jace's team can discover trends. Sorry, I just kind of threw the word nurdle at you.
Yeah, nurdles is a plastic pellet, and so they're about the size of a lentil, and it's actually the raw material to make everything plastic.
They're individually small, but they're the second largest source of plastic pollution worldwide. Jace's first foray into nurdle hunting showed something shocking.
So in 2018, I was at the beach and looked down at the high tide line, and that's usually where you just see sticks, leaves. That's where you look for seashells. But when I looked down there was solid plastic pellets in there.
At the time, Jace thought the nurdles he found were from some major spill. He called the Coast Guard and a state agency responsible for regulating things like this, but instead of doing anything about it, they basically told Jace to figure it out himself. And what Jace found was much worse than just one big spill.
Each facility has a different extrusion plate that makes the shape and size of the nurdles, and then the color difference. So like the yellower the color, the longer it's been into the environment. So once you look back at the sample that we have taken during that initial spill, we now know that 99% of those nurdles were all different. And it could be 200 to 300 nurdles. And if all of those are different, that is literally 200 to 300 different spills that had occurred. And it really shows that there's a chronic problem with nurdles getting out into the environment.
Big spills do happen, like all the time. But the persistent problem isn't some big accident that would make the news, but just putting these things out as regular standard operating procedure, part of their daily routine. Jace's Nurdle Patrol puts out a map that shows where citizen researchers are finding this stuff, and it really illuminates how it's happening.
Yeah, so what we have found over the years of collecting this data is there's a close correlation with where plastic is manufactured to where the higher concentrations are.
You also see higher concentrations around train tracks. Nurdles are transported by train, and they just fall off along the route.
Unfortunately, with these pellets, it's this chronic everyday problem that at the manufacturing site, a little bit falls on the ground. During transportation, a little falls on the ground. During distributing, a little falls on the ground. When it rains, it really just accumulates into the rivers, washes out into the oceans, and washes back up. And there is no body to clean it up.
To make things worse, these things aren't considered hazardous waste by the government, and that's an important distinction. They're barely regulated, meaning companies can kind of do whatever they want.
These pellets are lightweight. They put them on the very top and on the outside of shipping container boats. And so if they were considered hazardous material, they would actually have to put those containers in the hull of the boat. If there's a spill, they would have to document how many were lost, and they would also have to log where they dispose of them. So it would change basically everything about the way that they currently handle the plastic pellets.
In 2022, Texas regulators plan to start treating nurdles as the dangerous pollution they are, but industry lobbyists stop them. So let's look at some industry hotspots on Jace's map.
And so if we click on here, you can see over 16,000 nurdles by one person for a 10-minute period.
16,000. So we were looking at 200 before. That's 16,000.
Right. And so since this is right outside Formosa Plastics, it's easy to see why the concentrations would be so high right here.
16,000 nurdles in 10 minutes. That's a lot of nurdles. So I headed to Point Comfort, Texas, where Formosa Plastics is headquartered, to find out more. My contact there was Diane Wilson, a local of nearby Seadrift, Texas, and fourth-generation commercial fisherwoman who's been standing up for local communities against their polluters for decades.
Chairman Stoop. Chairman,
okay.
Back. Ranking members,
This is what it looks like in the marshes. This is what it looks like for the fishermen down there. And I think you need to be charged with a crime. You need to go to jail. As a matter of fact, I've got some chains and I'm going to assess the rest. Ma'am.
If you go downtown Seadrift, we used to have steelworks. We had marine supplies.
All that business is gone?
Yes, it's gone.
And you link that, is that linked directly to Formosa moving in?
Well, it's all of the plants, but Formosa has made a big impact.
Formosa, a Taiwanese company, has had a presence in Texas since 1979. They fought hard to get quick approval for constructing their chemical plant near waterways. 10 years later, they fought hard to get approval to expand it, threatening to move the entire plant out of Texas if they didn't get approval tomorrow.
The money's coming in, but what happened to the money that all these families, these workers, these small businesses were making?
Do you know they don't even count them? Nowhere in there is the cost of the devastation of all of these fishing communities, the fish houses, the jobs that went along with them.
The state and federal regulatory agencies decided the impact of the plant and its expansion were minimal in comparison to what they saw as an economic boon for the area. But the only boon was a boon of plastic waste everywhere.
It was in people's swimming pools, it was on their cars, covering their cars, so it was everywhere, except it was total denial and the state wouldn't do anything.
But there was someone who could do something. Diane. Like all of us, she kind of has the power to be a regulator herself due to one bill.
In the Clean Water Act, there is a provision that if the state or the feds are not enforcing, then a citizen can.
So Diane started collecting evidence to sue Formosa Plastics for polluting the waterways.
I found out where all of their stormwater outfalls were, and I got a kayak, and I literally discovered them myself. Nobody told me where they're at. When you have rain, everything is jammed, and it goes over, and it just goes out.
Just straight into this water.
Straight out here. Plastic was everywhere.
She allied with workers at the plant who saw firsthand how cavalier Formosa was in mishandling the leakage of vinyl chloride, a chemical used in plastic production that at high enough levels of exposure can cause cancer.
They would have maybe a 2,000-pound release, and it was like all over the yard, it's all over the cement, it's in the ditches, it's overflowing. And he says his supervisor would come in and like, well, how much is over there? And he says, tell me what you want me to write. And they eventually reported 2 pounds. 2 pounds to the EPA. And it was over 2,000. And he said, I lied for them every time.
Diane won $50 million from Formosa, the largest ever citizen settlement, for the harms they wrought on the bay, and that money went directly to the fishing community that had been destroyed.
But when we talk about that amount of money as a punishment for Formosa, do you feel like that's enough to be a true punishment to them?
No, not at all.
For comparison, Formosa made 4,000 times that in 2019. And these companies, Formosa, Dow Chemical, Chevron, and DuPont, and Exxon, and the rest, push solutions that are distractions and half measures designed to make it look like they're doing something without really doing anything. Like Operation Clean Sweep, the entirely voluntary slate of best management practices plastic companies adopted in the 1990s to avoid pollution that even Formosa signed up for. It clearly didn't do much to stop Formosa's plastic pollution, but they sure talked about it a lot. So what does this all mean for you? Well, it could be making all of us sick. Researchers at the University of Vienna have even linked microplastic ingestion to colorectal cancer. At the same time, we're seeing more and more of that cancer among surprisingly young people. The effects on the endocrine system, that's where hormones are produced, are widely documented. And microplastics are showing up in fetuses and placenta. We have no idea what this will do to our next generations.
It's real concerning to read all these papers that come out and hear that there are microplastics in our organs. What long-term impacts is that going to have? Do we have a real answer for that yet?
Congress may finally be doing something. The Plastic Pellet-Free Waters Act was introduced to Congress in early 2024 to address the lack of EPA and state regulation on nurdles. But the plastic industry's been pushing back hard, citing the Do Nothing Clean Sweep program as evidence the regulatory changes are unnecessary. And it's important to remember it didn't have to be this way. This is all about profit. Keeping these particles out of our waterways would cost these companies more money. Pumping out more and more plastic products is profitable. But is any of that savings getting passed on to you, or only the chemicals that are poisoning you? Even back to the Coke bottle.
Along with measuring consumer response, these tests enable Coca-Cola USA to further evaluate the technical, manufacturing, economic, environmental, and health aspects of the new container.
They push the bottle out quickly to test the environmental and health effects on real people, which is kind of what the entirety of the plastic project feels like.
Unfortunately, I think we're probably going to learn the hard way of, what the real impact is over time.
For today, plastics are changing the appearance of our everyday world. New materials will be found, new processes discovered, not by those now engaged in industry, but by you. Your new frontier.
Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support more nonprofit independent journalism like this, fighting corporate greed, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if there's something that makes you as worried as microplastics make me, let us know in the comments. We'll try to make a video about it.